The air inside Bean Ridge Cafe, nestled in the bustling heart of Denver, Colorado, carried the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the rhythmic hum of grinders. The atmosphere buzzed with the gentle murmur of conversations, a symphony of students typing furiously on their laptops, couples whispering in quiet intimacy, and locals indulging in their daily caffeine rituals. The cafe was more than just a coffee shop. It was a haven of connection and community. Its walls were adorned with vibrant artwork created by local talents and posters advocating for important environmental causes, embodying its spirit of inclusivity. But on this particular mid-morning, the harmonious routine was disrupted. A man stepped inside, seemingly blending into the crowd, yet drawing every eye to him as if commanded by an invisible force. His casual attire might have been unremarkable, but the bright red MAGA hat perched on his head shone like a beacon, loud and provocative. Without trying, he became the center of attention. With a confident stride, he approached the counter. To the staff and patrons, he appeared to be just another customer, ordinary in many ways, yet undeniably polarizing. What they didn't know was that the man standing before them was none other than Elon Musk, the billionaire tech tycoon, and, more intriguingly, the CEO of the very coffee chain they frequented daily. Behind the counter stood Lily Summers, a sharp-witted barista with a strong sense of justice. A junior at the University of Denver, she was studying sociology and prided herself on standing up for her beliefs. Her heart froze when she spotted the glaring red letters on the man's hat. To her, the hat wasn't just an accessory, it was a symbol that carried weight, a reminder of division and pain. It stood for values she had protested against at rallies, values she felt had harmed communities she cared about deeply. Lily tried to steady her breathing as the man approached. She could feel her pulse quicken, the rhythm pounding in her ears. The cafe had a strict policy of treating all customers equally, but her convictions roared against compliance. Her mind raced with memories of her family, her friends, and the passionate demonstrations she had attended. The hat seemed to radiate a heat that burned into her principles. The man, oblivious to her internal turmoil, offered her a polite smile as he reached the counter. His tone was calm and friendly as he spoke. "Good morning," he said. "Could I get a large Americano, please?" The words hung in the air, simple yet weighted. Lily's heart pounded harder and her mind churned. Serving this man felt like betraying everything she stood for, yet refusing him was a direct defiance of the cafe's policy. Her lips parted, but the words came out hesitant at first. "I'm sorry," she stammered, then straightened herself as resolve hardened in her voice. "We can't serve you." The atmosphere in the cafe shifted instantly. Conversations hushed, and curious glances shot toward the counter. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, like an echo no one could ignore. Elon's polite smile faltered, replaced by an expression of mild confusion and curiosity. "Can't serve me?" he repeated, his tone measured and calm. "May I ask why?" Lily glanced at the hat again, its bright red letters almost mocking her from their perch on his head. Her gaze flicked back to his face, her voice steady but resolute as she responded. "That thing on your head," she said firmly, gesturing slightly toward the hat. "It represents everything that goes against what this place stands for, what I stand for." The room seemed to grow heavier with silence. A few patrons exchanged bewildered glances, while others leaned in slightly, eager to catch every word of the unfolding drama. Elon tilted his head, a flicker of disappointment crossing his features, though his calm demeanor remained unbroken. "I see," he said thoughtfully, clasping his hands on the counter. "But you don't know anything about me." "I don't need to," Lily snapped, her voice rising slightly. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "That hat says enough." The quiet murmur of the cafe was now replaced by a thick, palpable tension. In the corner, Eric, a soft-spoken barista in his late 20s, stood frozen by the espresso machine. His eyes darted nervously between Lily and Elon, his expression a mix of shock and anxiety. "Lily," he whispered, his voice low and urgent, "just make the coffee." But Lily shook her head, her resolve hardening with every passing second. "No," she said firmly, "this isn't just about coffee. It's about what's right." Elon let the silence linger for a moment, the weight of Lily's words settling over the room like a heavy fog. The eyes of every patron were on him now, waiting for his reaction. But instead of anger or frustration, there was something else. A quiet patience, as though he was carefully considering his next move. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small, sleek business card. With deliberate calm, he placed it on the counter and slid it toward Lily. "Maybe you should take a look at this," he said, his tone measured and firm. Lily hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the card, and with trembling fingers, she picked it up. The name printed in bold, unmistakable letters caught her off guard. Elon Musk, founder and CEO, Bean Ridge Coffee. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and for a moment she felt as though the ground beneath her had vanished. Around her, the room grew impossibly quiet. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the gravity of the situation began to sink in for everyone else. Lily's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she looked back up at him. Elon didn't gloat or mock her. His expression remained calm, even patient. "I'd still like that Americano," he said softly, his tone neutral but with an undeniable firmness. "If it's not too much trouble." Lily's hands shook as she processed what had just unfolded. She could feel the weight of every eye in the cafe boring into her, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Her mind raced, scrambling for a response, but she felt trapped, unsure of what to do or say next. Behind her, Eric stepped closer, his voice barely audible but laced with urgency. "Lily," he whispered, "just make the coffee and let it go." But Lily stood frozen, the business card still clutched in her trembling hand. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to act, to say something, to make a decision. Elon stood across from her, his composure unshaken. His presence alone seemed to command the room. He didn't push or raise his voice. He simply waited. And that, more than anything, unnerved her. Finally, Lily drew in a shaky breath and turned toward the espresso machine. The cafe seemed to exhale collectively as she began to prepare the order, the rhythmic sounds of grinding coffee beans and steaming milk breaking the oppressive silence. When she handed Elon his coffee, her fingers still trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "Here you go," she said quietly, unable to meet his eyes. "Thank you," Elon replied with a polite nod. Taking the cup, he walked calmly to a table near the window. He sat down, sipping his coffee and scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. Unbeknownst to Elon and Lily, a patron had recorded the entire exchange and uploaded it to social media. The caption read, "Barista refuses to serve Elon Musk for wearing a MAGA hat. Turns out he owns the place." Within hours, the video went viral, sparking an online frenzy. By the next morning, Lily's phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications, texts from friends, missed calls, and social media alerts flooded her screen. Her rarely used Instagram account had suddenly become a battleground, with hundreds of comments pouring in. Some hailed her actions as brave. "You're a hero for standing up for what you believe in. Don't back down." Others were less kind. "If you can't handle serving everyone, you shouldn't be working in a coffee shop." Lily's heart sank as she scrolled through the messages. The video didn't capture the full context of the moment or the internal struggles she had faced. It showed only a brief snippet of her life, reduced to a few tense seconds for the internet to dissect and debate. Her manager, Rick, called her that morning, his voice filled with concern. "Lily," he began, "we need to talk. You know what this is about, right? I do, she replied softly, already dreading what was coming. We're getting calls, Rick continued. Corporates involved now. They're not happy. I'm trying to keep things from spiraling, but this isn't going to blow over quickly. Lily felt her stomach churn. The weight of her decision, combined with the viral backlash, threatened to crush her. Meanwhile, Elon sat in his Austin office, fielding calls from his public relations team. The video had already garnered millions of views, igniting debates across news outlets and social media. Conservative commentators praised Elon for his calm demeanor and resilience, calling him a champion of free speech. On the other hand, progressive voices scrutinized the implications of his hat, arguing that it symbolized division and harm. Lauren, Elon's head of PR, appeared on a Zoom call, her tone brisk and urgent. "This is getting bigger than we anticipated," she said. "We need to make a public statement." Elon leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "I don't want to escalate this," he said firmly. "It was a misunderstanding, not a campaign." Lauren frowned. "But the narrative is out of our control now. If we don't address it, people will fill in the blanks." Elon sighed, thinking back to the exchange with Lily. He remembered the trembling in her voice, the fire in her eyes, and the way her convictions seemed to waver when she learned who he was. She wasn't his enemy, just a young woman trying to navigate her values in a complex world. "Let's keep it simple," he finally said. "I'll acknowledge the incident, but focus on what matters. Dialogue, not outrage." That afternoon, Elon posted a video on his social media accounts. Standing in a minimalist room, he addressed the camera directly, his tone calm and measured. "Hi, everyone," he began. "By now, many of you have seen the video of my visit to one of my coffee shops. There's been a lot of discussion about what happened, and I want to share my perspective." He paused, letting his words settle before continuing. "First, I want to say that I respect Lily, the barista in the video. She acted on her principles, and while I disagreed with her decision, I believe in the importance of standing up for what you believe in. At the same time, we need to find ways to disagree without tearing each other apart." Elon's expression softened as he leaned slightly forward. "This isn't about hats or politics. It's about people. I hope we can use this moment as an opportunity to listen to each other and have the tough conversations that lead to understanding." The video concluded with a simple, hopeful message. "Let's talk." Elon's video drew widespread attention, garnering millions of views within hours. Public reactions were as polarized as ever. Supporters praised his calm and measured response, calling it a much-needed example of leadership in a divisive time. Critics, however, accused him of downplaying the deeper implications of the MAGA hat, arguing that it symbolized harm and exclusion for many communities. For Lily, the video was a bittersweet moment. While she appreciated Elon's attempt to de-escalate the situation, it didn't erase the flood of online criticism she continued to receive. Her inbox was inundated with messages, some offering support, others calling for her to be fired. Her manager, Rick, called again later that day. His tone was serious but understanding. "Lily," he said, "corporate wants us to stay neutral, but you should know that this has gone way beyond the cafe. You might need to prepare for the worst." "I understand," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. Meanwhile, Elon reached out to Naomi Carter, a respected social justice advocate in Denver, known for her ability to mediate in contentious situations. Naomi had built a reputation for organizing community forums that fostered understanding across diverse perspectives. When Elon explained the situation to her, Naomi listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "So, you want to hold a community meeting?" she asked. "Yes," Elon replied. "I want to talk face-to-face with the people affected by this, to listen and understand their perspectives." Naomi tilted her head, studying him carefully. You know this won't be easy, right? People are hurt and angry. I know, Elon said, but we have to start somewhere. Naomi considered his words before nodding. All right, she said, let's do it. But this has to be done the right way, with real honesty. A week later, a modest community center in Denver became the setting for what would be a pivotal moment in the saga. Rows of folding chairs were arranged in a circle, and people began trickling in, some curious, others apprehensive. The atmosphere was a mix of tension and cautious hope. Naomi stood at the center of the circle, her commanding presence helping to calm the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice clear and steady. "We're here tonight because an incident at a coffee shop sparked a conversation about symbols, beliefs, and respect. This meeting isn't about assigning blame or winning an argument. It's about understanding." She gestured toward Elon, who sat quietly in one of the chairs. "Mr. Musk has agreed to join us to share his perspective, and more importantly, to listen to yours. Let's keep this civil and productive." Elon stood and faced the group, his tone thoughtful and deliberate. "Thank you, Naomi," he began, "and thank you all for being here. I know the last few days have been intense. I won't pretend to know what everyone here has gone through or what this hat," he gestured to an imaginary cap, "means to each of you. But I can tell you what it means to me. It represents freedom to think differently, to question norms, and to believe in economic opportunity. But I also understand that for many, it represents something very different, and I want to hear why. I'm here to listen." The room remained quiet for a moment before a young woman raised her hand. She wore a sweatshirt emblazoned with the words, "Love Wins," and sat with her shoulders squared, though her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "My name is Erin," she began. "Honestly, that hat feels like a slap in the face to people like me. My parents are immigrants, and some of the policies associated with it made their lives so much harder. When I see it, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like exclusion." Elon nodded thoughtfully, his expression softening. "Thank you for sharing that, Erin," he said. "I appreciate your honesty." A man in his 50s wearing a button-down shirt spoke up next. His voice was steady but tinged with frustration. "I'm Rick," he said. "I'm a veteran, and that hat reminds me of the freedoms I fought for, the right for everyone to have their own opinions. But these days it feels like having a different opinion makes you an enemy. That's not the country I fought for." The tension in the room grew heavier, yet it wasn't hostile. It was introspective. Naomi stepped in, her voice calm yet commanding. "Thank you both for sharing. This is exactly why we're here. Let's keep the conversation going. Lily, would you like to share your perspective?" Lily, seated near the edge of the circle, hesitated. She felt the weight of every gaze in the room, the spotlight of expectation falling squarely on her shoulders. Taking a deep breath, she stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "My name is Lily," she began, her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "I'm the barista from the video." The room collectively turned its attention to her. Some faces were sympathetic, others reserved. She swallowed hard but pressed on. "I made a decision that day because I thought I was standing up for what was right. But I realized now that I acted too quickly. I didn't stop to think about what I could learn from the situation or the person in front of me." She glanced briefly at Elon before continuing. "I still believe in standing up for my principles, but I've learned that shutting someone out because of what they're wearing doesn't lead to understanding. It just builds a bigger wall." Her voice faltered slightly as she added, "I'm sorry for how I handled it. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but I see now that I might have." Elon's gaze remained fixed on her, his expression unreadable but attentive. After a moment, he spoke. "Thank you, Lily. That takes courage." Over the next hour, stories poured out from the attendees. A black mother shared her experience of feeling alienated in certain communities, her voice trembling with emotion. A small business owner recounted how particular policies had nearly destroyed his livelihood, frustration etched into his face. A college student described her participation in marches and rallies, explaining the causes she believed in with unflinching passion. Each story added depth to the conversation, breaking down stereotypes and fostering an atmosphere of empathy. Some discussions grew heated, but Naomi skillfully guided the group, redirecting energy toward understanding rather than division. By the end of the meeting, the tension in the room had transformed into something more constructive. It wasn't perfect, deep differences remained, but the seeds of dialogue had been planted. As the meeting concluded, Naomi addressed the group. "We've heard a lot tonight," she said, her voice carrying a sense of hope and determination. "What I hope you all take away from this is that dialogue matters. It doesn't mean we'll always agree, but we can at least see each other as people, not enemies." Elon stood next, his tone sincere. "I came here to understand," he said, "and I hope I've done that tonight. We won't solve everything in one meeting, but this feels like a good start. Thank you for being part of it." The room erupted into applause, not loud or boisterous, but warm and genuine. For the first time, it felt like a small but significant step forward. The following morning, news of the community meeting spread quickly. Local media picked up the story, framing it as an unusual yet inspiring moment of dialogue in an increasingly divided world. Headlines like "Musk meets the people," "Cafe controversy," "Sparks community dialogue" began appearing across social media and news outlets. For Elon, the meeting had been an eye-opener. Back in his office in Austin, he reflected on the stories he'd heard. Each perspective, raw and unfiltered, had challenged his understanding of how symbols like the hat were perceived by others. He couldn't stop thinking about Aaron's pain, Rick's pride, and Lily's conflicted apology. That afternoon, Elon called Naomi Carter to thank her. "That meeting was just the start," he said. "We need to take this further." Naomi, ever pragmatic, responded with her usual calm wisdom. "You've got the resources and the platform," she said. "If you want to make this a movement, I'll help. But it has to be about real, lasting change." Elon nodded, even though she couldn't see him through the phone. "Let's make it happen," he said. Within weeks, Elon and Naomi launched a nationwide initiative called Bridges at Bean Ridge. The program aimed to transform the coffee chain's cafes into hubs for dialogue and understanding. Each participating location would host monthly bridge nights, inviting patrons to come together and share their stories in a moderated, respectful environment. The initiative also included scholarships for underserved students, partnerships with local organizations, and grants for community projects. Each cafe would display posters inviting people to join the conversation with the tagline, "Building Bridges, one cup at a time." Lily was asked to take on a prominent role in the initiative, helping to oversee the program's implementation across the Denver area. Initially hesitant, she turned to Naomi for guidance. "You've got first-hand experience of what it means to stand up and learn from a mistake," Naomi told her. "That's exactly what this program needs." Lily agreed, and soon she found herself conducting facilitator training sessions, organizing events, and even speaking at conferences about her journey. Her growth from barista to community advocate became a cornerstone of the program's story. The first few bridge nights were a mixed bag. Some locations drew large crowds eager to engage, while others struggled to fill seats. At the Denver Cafe, where the controversy had started, the turnout was overwhelming. People of all backgrounds showed up, curious and ready to share their perspectives. At one of these events, Erin, the young woman who had spoken at the community meeting, stood up again. "I came back because I wanted to say that listening to other people's stories helped me see things differently," she said. I still stand by my beliefs, but I'm learning to see the person behind the opinion." Her words resonated deeply, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Over time, the initiative gained momentum. Social media posts about bridge nights began trending, and news outlets highlighted the program as a rare example of constructive dialogue in a fractured society. Teachers, activists, and even politicians reached out to Bean Ridge, asking how they could bring similar conversations to their own communities. For Lily, the transformation was personal as much as it was professional. She no longer saw her job at the cafe as just a means to an end. It had become a platform for connection and growth. One evening, as she stood behind the counter, Elon walked into the Denver cafe again. This time, he wasn't wearing a hat. His presence was calm and unassuming as he approached the counter. "Americano?" she asked, smiling slightly. "Please," he replied with a nod. As she prepared his drink, Elon leaned on the counter and asked, "How are things going with the program?" Lily handed him his coffee and replied, "Busy, but it's a good kind of busy. People are showing up, sharing their stories. It feels like we're making a difference." Elon smiled. "That's exactly what I hoped for." A year after the program's launch, Bridges at Bean Ridge had become a movement in its own right. Cafes that were once simply places to grab a coffee had evolved into spaces where people could come together, listen, and learn from one another. Lily, now a regional coordinator for the initiative, often reflected on how far she had come. The moment at the counter with Elon had been a turning point, not just for her, but for countless others who had been inspired by the program. Elon, too, saw the initiative as one of his proudest achievements. In a rare interview, he explained, "This was never about coffee or politics. It was about people. And if we can create spaces where people feel safe enough to talk and be heard, then we've done something meaningful." The Denver location, once the backdrop for a moment of division, had become a beacon of connection. Its walls were now adorned with photos from bridge nights and messages of hope written by patrons. It stood as a testament to what was possible when people chose dialogue over division. As Elon walked out of the cafe that day, the sun casting a warm glow over the bustling street, he felt a rare sense of hope. One step at a time, the bridges they had built were holding strong, and the path forward seemed brighter than ever.